Hi, I'm Carlos. I am a Team Juggernaut AI athlete, and today I'm going to be going over the setup for the squat. Here's my model here, Lou. She's been gracious enough to help out today. And the first thing that I like to tell any of my athletes when they start squatting is first to set up their grip. Normally, I tend to go pinkies on the rings, and then as my mobility gets better, I tend to go as close as possible to about thumb's length away. Obviously, depending on how wide you are or what your shoulder mobility is, that's going to be very dependent on. But I usually try to go something as better as pinkies on the rings to start. So can you show me your normal grip? So you're about middle finger. So what I like to do is to see where your actual bar placement is. And then right here. So if we're going to be doing a high bar position, so come out of the rack for a second, I like to think in terms of setup as a checklist. So my first checklist is to make sure that my elbows are down and compact, and I try to bring my shoulder blades together because that creates a better shelf right here. As you can see, just by doing that, the barbell is sitting on her a lot more tight than it would be otherwise. So let's re-rack the bar and let's start again because I want to make sure, yep, you're good. I'm just going to move that so it's centered. And now I want you to do what you did after walking out, but from the get-go. So try to pull those elbows down as you walk up. Here, squeeze your hands more, so try to get that pinky. Yeah, so this is a very strong position because as you can see from the side, the barbell is literally lined up between her shoulder, her hips, and her ankles. I like to have that set up because when you're in that position, there's no stress on the lower back, everything is on the hips. And if you can keep all that pressure on the hips, you can lift a lot more weight in a lot safer way. And now let's piece this all together. I want you to squeeze your hands with your pinkies here, retract your scaps here, and really create that shelf. So 1 step, 2 step, then have your stance for squatting. And now brace here, and then actually try to initiate the squat. The whole position of walking it out like this is to be able to make sure that the barbell is sitting on her hip. Because if it's too far forward, it's going to create pressure on her back, and if it's too far back, the bar is actually going to slide up. So my first tip for everyone is to make sure that not only is the grip even, and you're actually grabbing the bar with all your hand and not just holding it there, but actively pulling the bar down as you walk out. So once you find that step, you create that pressure point where the barbell just sits right over your hip. Whenever I warm up either for high bar or low bar, and I'm gonna try to do high bar just to make things easier, I always try to look at the bar and make sure that however I grip it is equal. So when I'm here, I'm already like gripping it as hard as possible. So when I get underneath the bar, there's nothing gonna twist, so my hands don't really move, they just kind of stay there. So when I'm here, and that's a lot, you can already tell that the bar is already in the position that I want it to be. So when I step back and walk back, it's not doing this, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing this or this, it's actively in a tight position. So I'm here. So I want to make sure that when you do this, that instead of kind of just getting underneath the bar and kind of doing this, because if I do that, I'm already like this. This is not conducive to good squatting. I always make sure that when I look at the bar, that not only is it consistent on both sides of it, but if I need to like temporarily warm up by artificially creating a shelf that's not really there, in this case, going the 3 finger claw, as I warm up, I'll be less and less, being able to rely on that and actually use like a real grip. But for now, just to keep everything warmed up, I'll do that. And now everything's consistent. So I'm already here. The bar is already naturally centered. I'm able to get my elbows, wrists, and shoulders in a position to actually squat well. So now I'm ready to squat. So when I take in my breath, I'm not thinking like benching where I'm expanding my air like as high as possible. What I think about doing with squatting is that with benching, I try to make my gut as big as possible to cut the range of motion. For me, that's what works best. When I'm thinking about squatting, I'm doing the opposite. I'm thinking about keeping my rib cage down and bracing, not really pushing my stomach out, but trying to keep everything here. So along with the neutral spine and making sure that my shoulder, elbow, hip, and ankle are lined up, I want to make sure that when I take in my air, I'm still in that position. So even though I'm bracing, I'm not thinking big belly, I'm thinking keeping my rib cage down. And then the most important thing that I find with keeping my rib cage down while taking my air in is breathing everything through the nose. Because if I open my mouth, my chest is gonna raise up, and then that thing throws everything out of whack. So I see a lot of lifters, bodybuilders or powerlifters, they'll take in a huge breath with their mouth, but their shoulders, chest is gonna rise up and they're already like in an extension position instead of keeping everything neutral. If you keep everything neutral, you're gonna be able to produce the most amount of force in a safer manner as opposed to something like this. I call this like almost like the stripper squat because they're like doing this. And the reason why a lot of people get into that position is because they take in their air through their mouth. So I actively think everything with the nose, hold, and then squat. If I do everything through the mouth, and if I breathe out of my mouth, you know, I'm either gonna have my chest start coming down, or if I take in air, I'm over exaggerating the extension of my back. So I wanna make sure everything is as natural as a shelf as possible. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. When do you exhale?
So I exhale in between reps. So when I think about taking in air, so here's my setup. So I'll get underneath the bar. Make sure everything's centered, here. 1 step, 2 step. I try to do 2 step, but if I have to adjust based on how my hips are, I'll adjust from here. I don't really dance my feet, I don't really do any of that. I just make sure that it's more of a slide, and if I have to adjust it further out, it's more of a slight adjustment as opposed to picking up my feet. So I take in my air, pack everything in, squat, come back up, and then I'll take in my air again at the top of every rep and do everything through the nose. You can even see from when I'm talking, because everything is packed, the bar doesn't move. It's staying right there. So the important thing about that is that if it stays there, you're not gonna roll forward, you're not gonna roll back, you're not gonna roll side to side. I see a lot of squatters do this, the crab walk, or if they take in air, they get out of position, they go down, and then the bar falls where your eyes are, so if they go down, they'll dump this way. Or if they look up, all the way up and extend, the bar will slide off, and I've seen that also happen as well too. So for me, in order to maintain not only rigidity, stability, and tightness, everything through the nose, even in between reps. It's very hard to do at first because it's very not second nature, but because you're only taking in just enough air for that rep, I try to take in my reps at the top, my air at the top of every rep. So I'll show that one more time. So I'm here, and excuse my squat depth because I'm very tight. But I'll set up, 1 step, 2 step, adjust, taking my air, but there's no wasted movement. So even though I'm squatting high, unfortunately my hips are very tight at the moment, there's no wasted movement. The only thing that's moving is my mouth. And as long as I can keep everything packed in and tight like that way, the less wasted effort with shifting, moving, dancing, whatever it may be, the more energy you can actually put into the lifting. So I try to be efficient in the sense of like how much energy am I actually using up for the walkout and taking in air. Because I'm already exhausted just thinking about or doing any of those weird noises that a lot of squatters tend to do. Not necessarily a bad thing, I just don't think that's optimal. I think in order to lift the most amount of weight, you have to use the least amount of energy for everything else other than the actual act of squatting. In this case, as long as I take everything through my nose and expel everything out of my mouth at the top of the rep, not during or while I'm coming up, because if you're breathing out as you're coming up, you're literally losing all of that pressure that you created and you're gonna collapse. So I try to do everything in between reps, but you have to be very disciplined because if you don't take in the air at the top of every rep, you're gonna pass out really quickly. So you have to take that extra half second to take in that air through your nose at the top of every rep before going back down, because naturally you're gonna lose air just from the strain of squatting. But also at the same time, in order to make sure that you don't hurt yourself, you gotta make sure you gotta take in that quick air breath through your nose after every rep. These cues are not only gonna help in terms of like optimal positioning, but in terms of overall well-being, where I get really tight ankles, I have really tight knees, I have really tight hips. It takes me a while to warm up, but because I try to get that squat pattern consistent and as efficient as possible, it's gonna get me to squat to depth in a pain-free manner a lot faster than it would be otherwise.